All right. So Genesis 39. Um yeah, as I said last week, there's a lot of parallels between this chapter and the previous chapter and kind of even the chapter before it. Um it's also a super well-known um story. Uh so let's just start it.
39. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there.
Okay. So the little preamble to it, um, notice in it that it says again the Ishmaelites brought him down there, which there was that whole discussion about, is it the Midianites? Is it the Ishmaelites? Are they two different groups? Are they the same name for one group? Remember, it originally introduced this group as the Ishmaelites, and then it starts calling them the Midianites, and then it starts calling them the Ishmaelites here again. So it does seem to be that it's just the one group. Um, the other thing is that if you click on, I think it says it in Step Bible. I'm not sure. Does it underline Step Bible officer, officer of Pharaoh, blah, 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 officer? Yeah, and it says eunuch. Um, and so you'll find some commentaries that will be like, "Oh, this means that Potiphar was a eunuch," but that kind of doesn't make sense because Potiphar has a wife here, and eunuchs very specifically don't have wives, which is why pretty much all English translations say officer. So it's like, uh,
You could explain why
yeah, eunuchs are officials that have been
captured.
castrated. Well, people do tie that together. They do tie that together and try to say that, well, maybe the reason why Potiphar's wife was going after Joseph is because her husband doesn't have anything.
That's on her.
Now,
Where do you
that being, and if she was married that way, obviously it would have been like an arranged things had that been going on. But in my opinion, that wouldn't be the case because the whole rationale for why you make someone a eunuch is is one, precisely so that they don't get married, and two, so that they don't have their own household, right? Like that's what you're doing. Like to have a household kind of means to have a family, and that you're having kids. The whole reason why you have a eunuch is so that they can live in your household. Eunuchs live in the official palace, like because they stay with the harem. And really, they're the person that is protecting the harem from other men. And you can trust them to protect the harem because they are castrated. So to me, it doesn't make any sense at all to say that Potiphar is a eunuch. That's just not functionally how eunuchs worked in the ancient world, or period. Like because people still had eunuchs like in like the Middle Ages and stuff too, specifically like China and stuff. Um,
I swear I just read somewhere something about I think Daniel. The word they use for him is like he's a eunuch. Um, Obviously he's not, but because I saw that exact argument that he wasn't a eunuch, it was more like he was in the presence of eunuchs when he went to the court of whoever the heck was Xerxes or whatever, whichever one. But it was I literally just saw that I don't remember where, but
interesting.
It was further arguing that okay, well, just because it says eunuch, that's
For Daniel, yeah, being in the exile.
I wish I could tell you where I saw that.
Yeah, no, I feel like I've heard that too.
I don't know. Just further backing up that, well, we shouldn't jump to the conclusion.
Right.
Well, it makes it funnier from the wife's view.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually going to make a slightly different argument that we'll get to a little bit later.
The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man.
Okay, I wanted to pause it right there for just to emphasize this. The Lord was with Joseph. That like phraseology, that's the main theme of this particular story. And we're going to see that because it's going to say the same exact line at the end of this scene, but also it's the same overarching theme for the entirety of Joseph's life is that part right there that like Yahweh is with Joseph.
And he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him, and he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had, in house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate.
Okay.
Potiphar getting a pretty sweet secondhand blessing from God there.
Like,
Yeah.
like the cocktail.
Gaming the system to the max. Just, hey, just let this guy do it.
Yes. So, which is going to be the reoccurring theme in Joseph's life, right? And one of the things that I'll mention again, but like this description or whatever should be compared to the description down below once he's in prison, and then compared to again whenever he's put in these other different positions. It's the same thing about everything that he put his hand to. He's basically is given a lot to charge, and the person that's put over him doesn't really even need to pay attention to what he's doing because he's so good at what he's doing. And all of that is attributed to God and God's blessing on his life. And there's an implication of the like the relationship between the two of them. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that as an outside source, I saw this in a couple different things. Everybody relates this story to there's a popular Egyptian story called The Tale of Two Brothers. Re-looking it up. And it was a popular Egyptian story which actually kind of dates from like the 1200s like BC. So I don't know about well after this.
400 years before they get bleed. More than that.
No, actually the date for well, yes. I can't remember all the dates of like the Exodus in like my head, because people argue over like the dates of like the Exodus.
Right.
But I think the early date is only like 150 years or so like before this.
Would be the early
So there's an early date and there's a late date. So
people side with.
So the early date of Exodus is 1447 BC, and the late date of Exodus is 1267 BC.
Usually seems to be what I see most things.
Yeah, and I think most people associate it with that late date. So that's only 60, 70 years out from.
Right. I mean, before this though. because this is 400 years before the Exodus.
Correct.
So
Correct.
it just seemed like you were going to say that people say
No.
they steal the story from them.
Well, people do think that, yeah, and obviously that's why I'm mentioning it, because people
Yeah.
are like, okay, are they like taking the story from that?
I definitely jumped a couple.
But I'm saying that the stories would have been like written around the same time.
Okay.
That's the argument that I'm saying. So I'm like, okay, like I can see how people might say that. But that being said, the stories really are quite different. Main thing being that the two kind of central characters, like in this one, it's like Potiphar and Joseph, and the Egyptian ones, they're brothers. The two guys are brothers, and it's the younger brother who's working in the house, and the older brother's working out in the field. And his wife comes and seduces him. He rejects her, and then she gives herself fake injuries, and whenever he comes home tells the husband, and the husband tries to kill the brother runs away. And it was funny because if like you read it on like Wikipedia, it then like explain the brother then returns home and kills the wife. And the older brother, the one who's married to her.
Okay.
The one who's married to her returns home and kills the wife. And so, and the more critical like scholarship one that I read, it just gave what it referred to as the secular version, which is basically everything that I just told you. That's because there's like everything that I just told you, there are like no gods or anything like involved. But in the like fuller story, it explains why he decided to kill her. And it's because as the younger brother was running away, some god made a lake full of crocodiles appear. And because of that, they were separated and they could have like a conversation with each other. And they started talking. And he explained to her that, or the younger brother explained that he didn't actually do it. And that's whenever the older brother decided to return home and kill his wife. And then a bunch of other like wild stuff happens. So the other thing is, so after the conversation, I'll just read this to you guys since I don't have much time anyways, or I don't have that much to say anyways. To emphasize his sincerity, Bata, that's the younger brother, severs his genitalia and throws them into the water where a catfish eats them. Bata says that he is going to the Valley of Cedars where he will place his heart on the top of a blossom of a cedar tree so that it is cut down. Anpu, that's the older brother, will be able to find it and allow Bata to come back alive again. Bata tells Anpu that if he is ever given a beer or a jar of beer that froths, he should seek out his brother. After hearing of his brother's plan, Anpu returns home and kills his wife. Meanwhile, Bata is establishing a life in the Valley of the Cedar, building a new home for himself. Bata becomes upon the Aeneid. The Aeneid is the council of 9 mythological deities. And if you watched Moon Knight, they reference them. The principal Egyptian deities who take pity upon him. Khnum, the god frequently depicted in Egyptian mythology as having fashioned humans on a potter's wheel, creates a wife for Bata. Because of her divine creation, Bata's wife is sought after by the pharaoh. When the pharaoh succeeds in bringing her to live with him, she tells him to cut down the tree in which Bata put his heart. They do so, and Bata dies. Anpu then the older brother receives a frothy jar of beer, and he knows that he has to begin his quest. So he sets off for the Valley of the Cedar. He searches for his brother's heart for more than 3 years, finding it at the beginning of the 4th year. He follows Bata's instructions and puts the heart in a bowl of cold water, and as predicted, Bata is resurrected. Bata then takes the form of a bull and goes to see his wife and Pharaoh. The wife, aware of his presence as a bull, asks the Pharaoh if she may eat its liver. The bull is then sacrificed, and 2 drops of Bata's blood fall from which grow into persea trees. Bata, now in the form of a tree, again addresses his wife, and she appeals to the Pharaoh to cut down the persea trees and to use them to make furniture. As this is happening, a splinter ends up in the wife's mouth, impregnating her. She eventually gives birth to a son whom the Pharaoh ultimately
Yeah,
makes
the mouth was questioned, not from Splinter.
yeah. Whom the Pharaoh ultimately makes crown prince. When the Pharaoh dies, the crown prince, a resurrected Bada, becomes king, and he appoints his elder brother Anpu as crown prince. The story ends happily with the brothers at peace with one another and in control of the country. So, like, the only other kind of like thing that sort of is similar is at the end of the story. They're like in control of the country, but like so much of that other stuff is completely different
It actually
and is doing different things.
It actually is surprising because I guess I didn't realize how many of Egyptian stories are based upon finding body parts of kin to resurrect them.
Yeah,
Which
man.
probably had a lot to do with why they like would disembowel people.
Yeah.
They're probably all linked together a bit.
Yeah.
Preserve the dead.
It's also funny to me because I distinctly remember oh no, I guess it was like the brain that they thought like they were doing.
Making furniture, it's tough work.
The furniture, man.
Splinters get everywhere.
Splinters don't jump off of the wood. That's not how it works.
She fell and like just like
Was she
smacked her
making out
face
with
into the
'cause
tree.
she's like, this is my husband.
No, it's the chair. No, she didn't like her husband. That was like the whole point.
No. She was just testing to make sure that the furniture would stand up to weather.
She was like constantly trying to screw the husband over.
And that involved having to lick the furniture.
Well, I also think it's funny because it's like apparently to emphasize his sincerity, he severs his genitalia, throws it in the water. The catfish was just like, okay, man.
To counter the point about a heart in a tree that gets cut down can be found, but manhood that a catfish eats, I don't think you can recover that.
Is it a?
I don't think you can get that.
Is that supposed to be? Is that supposed to be like an obscure Egyptian proverb? Like a heart in a tree may be found, but genitals in the mouth of a catfish.
Is there a symbol?
No.
I can't wait to read my next fortune cookie, and that's in there.
Yeah. So yeah.
Right.
Anyways, I figured I would share that just because I was like multiple commentaries all talked about that, and I was like, okay, but that's the thing with a lot of the commentaries.
That this folklore stemmed from this? Is that not possible?
You almost you almost never hear like I'd have to do more research in that particular topic in order to see if I could find any scholars that thought along those lines. I know, and it's actually my opinion that I do have that line of thinking whenever it comes to the Gilgamesh story, and it's mostly because of the differing accounts of the Gilgamesh story. Like the original Gilgamesh story apparently doesn't even have the references to like the flood and all this stuff, and it's a much later one that does have all the references to the flood and stuff. And so I have that with like that for the Gilgamesh story, but I don't know enough about this story.
It's such a tiny thing.
It's just a short.
Doesn't matter really at all.
Right,
It's
exactly.
kind of fun to think that maybe this somehow found its way into.
And the other thing is that, and for me, is that also it's just still the case that it's like, okay, even if that's the case, that it is like a folk tale that's going on there. What is the writer doing with that? And why is the writer making the changes that he does? And it's like, okay, well, if the writer is making these changes to it to fit in the context of what he's trying to talk about, well, he's doing that because he is very specifically trying to pass on theological truths about God.
You could think
make that happen.
This story, of course, we see it happen today. Like the game of telephone, things change a little bit more.
Yeah.
And so maybe this guy hears, some guy's second in command, maybe it was his brother, cheated on his wife, but maybe he didn't, and he had to prove himself. And now that's the guy sitting next to Pharaoh's throne. And so, like, if they hear that, they're going to be like, how the heck? Let's pretend that's true and go with that. And then they're gonna fill it in with some sort of god, someone along the way.
Well, and
some sort of
the other thing is that
events.
you also just have stories that are similar to each other. Like it happens very regularly where people just happen to do things that are similar because they are in similar cultural contexts. Like
women still accuse people of rape to this day.
yes, they do. But like you even get like more obscure ones. Like I remember I even watched like a YouTube video a little while back that was talking about like I guess it was something like I think it was like Tom and Jerry and then like Bugs Bunny and like something else like this same year and actually within like the same month or something like that, both released like a short cartoon of like the main character playing some piece by Bach, and it's like the same piece by Bach, and then there's like the mouse like running in it, and then they both suit each other, and it turned
which copies the other.
And it turned out that neither one of them were copying each other, and it was just they both had the same like creative like things coming up. But it's like, okay, because why is that? Because they were living in the same cultural context, and they had similarities.
Bach, obviously. The Bach Renaissance,
right? And it's like,
was it a Bach?
It's like it's not that wild to me that people would come up with these same kind of themes, that stuff like that would happen. Because it's like, yes, and it's like you just said, it's like people accuse each other of things today, and sometimes like the guy didn't do it, and sometimes you have like big stories that come out of that, and if it can turn out and be proven, that someone was falsely accused, well, very often the falsely accused person is then vindicated and then might be put in charge of something. Like that happens a lot of times because then they're seen as being very trustworthy. And so it's like, yeah, it makes sense that something like that could happen. So we'll keep going.
It's lists Hungarian Rhapsody number 2.
Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance.
Oh, darn it. So I forgot that this is the whole like part that I wanted to talk about. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food that he ate. So, question here. Why is Potiphar concerned about the food that he eats? And how are we supposed to take that section?
I would assume from like a cupbearer sense,
he's worried about being poisoned.
Which would make sense because he's essentially, by giving all control of everything he has to Joseph, he's removed his necessity for being there. So it would make sense for him to kind of be worried about being killed by Joseph or someone else, just so Joseph can take control.
On one hand, that's true. But on another hand, the verses preceding it are all about how he totally trusts Joseph. Right. And so it doesn't really, in my opinion, it doesn't make sense from like the author, like I'm writing this down. It doesn't make sense for the author to be like, oh, he totally trusts him with everything. Joseph was like busting it out, doing everything right, totally trusted him. The only thing that he concerned himself was with his food.
Maybe he's afraid for Joseph that he's going to get poisoned in Joseph.
I think it has nothing to do with poison.
It's all about food. I
think it's a comment about Potiphar basically calling him fat. Basically saying things were
doesn't want to be with him.
And that's the argument that I'm making.
Because he has no
particularly because the verse that comes right after that is, and now Joseph was handsome in form and in appearance. Right.
Well, it also is bad because he probably should have had some concern about his wife. Probably his only concern probably shouldn't have been.
Shouldn't have been food.
This guy's a hunk. Hold on. My wife hates me.
Right, like, and so the other thing that reason why I think that is because I think it, like, yeah, so whenever you actually like look up the word for food that he has there, it's lahem. I can't do there's a in there.
Yeah.
Lahem. It means bread. That's the word for bread. So it's like it's not even like it's just like he's just all he does is just eat bread, right? Which is and like it's a it's not the generic word for food. They have a generic word for food. I know this because I've been doing Duolingo. I don't know if the ancients had a generic word for food. I don't know that much. But so like this is a weak theory that I developed today whenever I was like studying things. But I was like,
Duolingo helps develop you.
Honestly, it's been helping me a lot with like understanding Hebrew. But yeah, it seems like it's kind of a comment there for otherwise I just think that the line is weird and out of place, and also it doesn't explain the transition. Whereas the idea that it's probably that the author's kind of making fun of him, it connects both the ideas that come before it and connects the ideas that come after it, namely Joseph's appearance.
Of course, why is the author going to know that he's fat? Is that just going to be something?
Why does the author know anything about it?
Right.
Either he has
Right, but is God going to impart that knowledge to Moses? By the way, this dude was fat.
Well, so
You would assume it's from like oral tradition.
so the options are the author being Moses, has sources, or oral tradition,
That's the only one.
or divine revelation.
And from oral tradition, it could make sense because in telling the story, there can be more said to imply reasons why this happened.
Why one thing or another thing is going on.
And that could be the
And it's possible that if it was orally passed down for, the 400 years or so, then maybe the people already knew that, and then when they read that line, they're like, "Oh yeah, because he was fat." It's not like they read that. Was he fat?
It's a joke that they're all in on.
Yes.
Or like whenever they retell it, they understand how to emphasize it because they've all heard it before.
Yeah.
That's a fun.
In the same way that like it's the equivalent of whenever like Pastor does this, but like any modern person's like reading a Bible story and they stop and they like make an aside of being like they'll make like a modern like reference or something about like the thing that they did or whatever. Yeah, he does that like all the time. But like it's very common for people to do that.
Like his comment about Abraham and Sarah.
Yes. Who would?
Who wouldn't? Okay.
After a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" And as she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not listen to her, to lie beside her, or to be with her.
Okay. So this portion, so a couple of things. One, notice how Joseph is saying that if he commits this sin, he is committing the sin against God. Also, I haven't mentioned it, but it's been going on throughout this passage. There's a consistent play here with like my master and the references to the Lord, right? Because my master is Adon, which is where Adonai comes from. And then also whenever Jews are saying this, when every single time Yahweh shows up, they say Adonai. So it's even like the line above where he's like, and my master sees what the Lord has done, like they would say, like, and even though, like, even my Lord sees what the Lord is doing, and the reason why this play is going on is because it's a way of elevating God, right? Because right, this is the same reason why we have the phrase like King of Kings, Lord of Lords, like all of this stuff, because if my Lord has a Lord, like he's even higher and all of this stuff. And so you have this consistent pointing up. The other thing that's interesting to me is this might also just be me, but whenever I kept reading this, I kept thinking about how similar, especially this part is, of where she casts her eyes on Joseph and says, "Lie with me." And how that is very similar to the Cain and Abel story, and where it's like, and sin is at your door and like wants to have you, right? Um and so this goes more to, and it makes sense to me as to why Joseph is kind of the conclusion of like Genesis as a book, because we've been talking continuously about how we've been having these continuous falls, and but at the same time, God like plants a seed with Abraham, and is trying to grow this plan of redemption. And the thing that's coming out of it now at the end of the story is Joseph, and Joseph is kind of the first real hero of like the Bible, who doesn't really do anything particularly wrong. And he's now given this same kind of temptation that Cain had, this temptation of sin. But because he's relying on God, and because he understands that ultimately it's sin against God, he doesn't fall. Now, he doesn't fall morally, he does fall practically. And so that's where you have these like the kind of contrasting themes between like these two different ones. Cain, like the outcome of a lot of what Cain does is actually like kind of positive for Cain, right? Like it works out for Cain. Cain ends up making a bunch of cities, having a bunch of kids, like doing all this stuff. Like he stuff happens for Cain. Like he succeeds in like killing his brother, right, and all this stuff. But it's still that moral degradation, and here we're having the reverse of that. But through God, the kind of the plan, the idea is that even though we're going down materially and things are getting worse, right? Because he's about to go to jail. It's gonna go back up. Okay. All right.
But one day, when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was there in the house, she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. And as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled out of the house, she called to the men of her household and said to them,
okay, we already talked about this, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but just the connection between the same pattern of Joseph losing his garments and it revealing who he really is, and ultimately that causes him to be cast down into a pit, and also how he's identified with the garment. He's identified with a personal item, same as in the last story where Judah was identified with a personal item.
"See, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came in to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house."
So the insult here, right? So first of all, like Hebrew means like I've always understood Hebrew to mean one from over yonder. But like Step Bible has it as one from beyond. And I was like, okay, those are basically the same thing. Basically, it's just someone from far away, right? So they're not even sojourners now, like they're someone from far, far away. So like basically she's being racist here. And saying, hey, you Egyptian servants, look at what like my husband has done by putting this foreigner in charge of all of us, and he's insulting us by letting him take advantage of me. And so you have that same kind of like collective identity thing going on there. Okay.
Then she laid up his garment by her until his master came home.
Oh, hold on right there.
Yeah, as soon as I read that, I was like, oh, she pulled a Jesse Smollett.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, because isn't it odd that after a traumatic criminal event, the first thing that the victim does is like, oh no, I need to stay here next to the proof so I can tell the people that the story really happened. Here's my evidence right here. Instead of like, no, get it away from me because it's obviously traumatic. I have it here. You can go get it, but I'm not going to stay by it. So like obviously staying by it is a marker of like, okay, you're just using this for evidence.
So the main thing we learned today is that Juicy Smollett did not read the Bible.
No, but he unwittingly played the part of Potiphar's wife.
And therefore, you cannot make the claim that the person who writes the story about Jesse Smollett borrowed this from the story of Potiphar's wife, right? Because sometimes similar things just happen.
I wouldn't even say like the argument of her like holding on to it. The argument for me is just that she's already defending her case. No one's said anything like, well, how do we know? Like she just obviously that may not be how it happened, but
well, exactly.
That's how people do it today. Is kind of the funny point.
Yeah, but in case you or anyone that is in the future listening to this, the reason why we say this is because Jesse Smollett was literally staying in his hotel room with, or maybe it was his apartment or whatever, but with the alleged noose that he was attacked with still on his neck, so that he could show the police, like, hey, they attacked me with this, and the police showed up like many minutes, if not more than an hour or two later, and he just kept it on. 4 appearances, exactly the way she's doing.
No, you said earlier how Hebrew says one from beyond, and it does. However, when you click on it there, the first thing it shows is human, and then it goes a little bit down and it says, oh, by the way, Hebrew is one.
That's because yeah, so in Hebrew there, sorry, what verse is that? I'm switching over to the other Bible, 14. Yeah, the reason why it says that is because she's calling him a man Hebrew.
It sounds even more racist.
Well, she a person of Hebrew. Yeah, she's calling like earlier in the. It's just a way of saying a Hebrew man. Earlier in the thing, it calls, whenever it says like Potiphar is an Egyptian, it calls him a man Egyptian.
No, it's obviously more racist because you have to specify that he's a man.
Yeah.
Honestly, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, so one of the things that I found today is it's on here. It's actually been really cool. Very, very tiny. Very, very tiny channel where a guy plays recordings of it in Hebrew, and then as it's
books of the Bible.
Yeah, and so he's got all of Genesis done, all of Exodus done, I think, and then some like other stuff too. And it's been cool because Duolingo has been teaching me like the letters, And so like, and then also just a couple of the words I know. So like listening to it, I'm like, ooh, I can pick up a couple things like here and there and stuff. And trying to figure out like how more of the language like flows together and stuff. Like one of the ones that stuck out to me, which is like when it says she like went up to him day by day. Like it doesn't say day by day, it's yom yom. Yom is the word for day. I thought that was funny. But yeah. I like how it does that, like jumping from like one to like the next or whatever. So like I can follow it along. Some of his earlier videos don't have that.
It looks like it has the translation underneath.
It does have the
which would be weird if they also did the word to word translation and it goes the opposite direction.
So what it is they have the English translation at the bottom, and then up here it's the translation of that specific word. And so like if you read the English at the top, it's very like weird. So it'll be like, and she is calling to the mortals of household of her, and she is saying,
okay,
this is how we would write it. And so like so like yeah, so here, so actually this is the part exactly. So ish ivri, ish ivri is man Hebrew. And so like ish mitzram is man Egyptian, so it's Egyptian man. So that's the whole reason why I was trying to show you that. Yeah.
I also I feel like it further supports the whole wife has disdain for husband. Just how she immediately starts with, see, he has brought us among this heat. And so she's not really directing her anger at the Hebrew who raped her. She's directing it at the man who brought him in.
Putting him into a position where like he has to do, because again, like I talked about like last week, the justice was seen as a social like crime, right? It's a social crime. And so in order for them to realize that it's bad, what occurred, it needs to be an insult to like everybody. It needs to be an insult to the community. And also like in order to get him to do something about it, like he kind like the Potiphar, he kind of needs to be at fault a little bit too, so that he's the one that does something about it, right? We'll keep going.
Told him the same story, saying, the Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came in to me to laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house. As soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, this is the way your servant treated me, his anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. And he was there in prison.
So yeah, so that part is like, so there's like I just got finished with the one like Pentateuch book, and it talked a lot about like how to deal with ambiguity in the narratives, and tried to make the case that there are many places where the ambiguity is intentional. And it seems to me like this is a pretty clear instance of a place where the ambiguity is intentional, because the question that you should be thinking of whenever it says that like Potiphar put him into prison is why? Joseph just got accused of rape. Rape is punishable by death. And like sexual immorality, and again, like same thing with last chapter. It's like where Judah was like, take her out and burn her, right? Like that's what you're supposed to do. That's what you do with like sexual immorality.
I guess it was the same in Egypt.
Yeah, the same pretty much everywhere. And so the fact that that didn't happen makes you go, well, why? And to me, it kind of seems to be like probably part of the reason why is like you could fill in things. So like plausible reasons are like Potiphar doesn't fully believe his wife, so he gives a lesser punishment. Potiphar is really grateful to the stuff that Joseph did, and so gives him a lesser punishment. The other idea is that God somehow stayed Potiphar's hand and made it so that he gave him a lesser punishment.
Or maybe Joseph had like a Jack Sparrow kind of escape from his hanging,
Ah,
and then ended up in prison instead.
That would be
So
cool
some-
story. That would end up in
that would have been in there.
Nah.
And so
it's in the novelization.
I think you could argue that like it's probably left ambiguous here to just say like it's some combination of those things, emphasized by this next part where it's like, and the Lord was with Joseph. So ultimately it's going to go back to the Lord is the one that's providing the way for Joseph.
It pulls a Kronk and just says, put him in prison where the prisoners were confined. He was in prison.
He was in prison.
They poisoned the goose girl.
The goose girl's boys.
But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed.
That guy's inflection sometimes just makes me laugh. Like, whatever was done there, he did it.
He did
it. Sound like Joseph was scheming in prison.
Yeah, so I guess the last kind of like point that I wanted to mention, this is just an idea again, just so everybody is aware of the differing ideas out there. For people that take the documentary hypothesis that think like multiple writers all kind of contributed to the text, they think that there's basically two stories that kind of got merged together to make the Joseph story. And one, they think that let me make sure I got this right. One, they think that Joseph is serving in the household of an unnamed official, and then the cupbearer and the baker come to the house, and Joseph is not in prison, and it's there that he gives them the interpretations of their dreams, and then after that he's taken to Pharaoh because he has this like power or whatever. And then in another version, Joseph is serving at Potiphar's household, and then this incident happens with the wife, and then he's sent to prison. But the stuff with like the stuff with like the cupbearers or whatever, like I guess don't happen or something like that. And they think that like the two stories got like combined. And so part of the evidence for that is the fact where I mentioned before, the stuff beforehand where it's describing Joseph in charge of the household is very similar language to him being in charge over the prison. And
it's in like every chapter, like that. Verses are mimicked all the time in chapters.
Yes.
Just doing this study alone, it's like, wow, I knew the Bible was repetitive, but
like,
sometimes they get carried away.
It's really, really repetitive. And actually, that's kind of the thing that like, whenever I started watching that like Hebrew like talking like video thing, actually, whenever it's in the Hebrew, it's like even more repetitive. And like to me, like I'm like, oh, I can kind of get why people would think of this as like poetry and stuff, because like it is just like very repetitive and like the soundings of like the words and all this stuff. Now that just might be a characteristic of the language, because like so many of the words, like especially whenever they're pluralizing things, end in eem, right?
Granted, you are only listening to Genesis.
That's true.
Like a standout book.
Exactly. And so like might be a little bit too early to like qualify that.
Until he gets to like saying.
Yeah, exactly. See if the language is different.
Speaking of the words, though, so that I'm assuming that's another instance of Hesed there in 21.
Yeah, for steadfast love. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, what verse is that again?
Verse 21.
See if I can find it. Hold on. That's 19. Hased. Yeah. Yeah. What is the last line in?
So, but
chief in the how in the keeper of the prison. That's interesting.
But
it has the direct translation of the word prison as the curve.
So, but that just means in that instance you can also read that as but the Lord was with Joseph and essentially held up his end of the bargain and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison.
Yes. Yeah. And because like remember, so like spoiler alert, like what God, because like this is the end of Genesis. From a narrative standpoint, what's going on here is God is fulfilling his promises that he made at the beginning of Genesis. Like that's what he's doing. And so it is kind of like the case that it's like God's got to kind of step in at the final hour here and really make sure that like stuff goes the right way so that God can do what? So that God can bless the nation of Israel, make them like the stars of heaven, and also bless the nations, right? He's trying to do all of those narrative things. Now, not completely, because Genesis is the end of the story, but even within Genesis, there's going to be like a wrapping up of all of that stuff. And you could argue whether or not that is like intentionally done or not, because right, the author of like traditionally the author of the whole Pentateuch is supposed to be Moses, so you would think that, oh well, it makes sense the narrative goes over the whole thing. But even people that are more critical are like, oh well, the language in Genesis up to Exodus is very similar, so that those things should definitely be connected. But it seems to me like it makes sense that it's like we have this portion, and then there's a story and a narrative that has like a beginning, middle, and end. But just because it has a beginning, middle, and end, that never means that it's the end. And we have a next story, and we have a beginning, middle, and end. Because like after this is really when we start focusing on the life of Moses. And then most of the rest of it is focused on the life of Moses. And actually, one thing that I learned about today, reading the other book that I have to write a paper on, is I didn't realize this. Apparently, Deuteronomy, like, only takes place over the span of like a day or two.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's what I remember, because I was watching a bunch of like Bible Project video stuff.
Do they mention that in there?
In their whole story? Well, I'm pretty sure it's mentioned that most of Deuteronomy is pretty much just like a speech. That
It should. Yeah,
It's a lot of it.
Well, because literally what it is, it's the Israelites that are about to go into the land, standing on the plain of Moab, and Moses speaking to them.
Yeah.
And basically what he's doing is he's reaffirming all of the things in Leviticus and Numbers to them, or Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, like the whole covenant and everything they're supposed to be doing, reiterating all of that to them, but also at the same time kind of recontextualizing it, because technically all of those Israelites are not the same Israelites as the one at Sinai. But what he does is he identifies them all as the same, because he literally says, he's like, you signed a covenant with the Lord at Sinai, but like everyone there didn't, except for like Joshua and Caleb, right? But yeah. Yeah. Anything else? That's all I had. Well, we will stop the recording there.